platforms serve a certain type of intermediary role that's bringing two disparate groups together. So generally, when we think of a regular business such as Walmart, Walmart is directly dealing with all the wholesalers and the manufacturers, and then they shelve their own products, and then ultimately the consumer buys from Walmart. But there are instances where rather than being the direct seller to the consumer, you want to bring two groups together who want to interact in some way. The classic examples are well, not classic, but a recent example is Uber. There are certainly drivers and passengers who would like to transact in some way. Previous to Uber, I guess you could hitchhike. I mean, certainly there are taxis and various other alternatives, but it didn't really match those who had capacity to take passengers and those who are interested in being moved from point A to point B. So Uber serves that purpose of bringing these two groups together. And so it really unlocks the value of a transaction that would arguably not occur or occur at an efficient level, but for that platform. And there's a variety of them, and we could go all day on these. Credit cards is another, bringing together merchants along with cardholders and into terms of a Amex system, for example, or a Visa or a MasterCard system, and Airbnb and Google through advertising and Facebook and et cetera. But the main incentives that these platforms is that they need to institute governance decisions that satisfy the preferences of both groups. And that's often missed. And so if you see Amex, for example, put in an anti-steering provision, meaning at the point of sale, you can't steer a consumer to Discover or Visa. You can't do that at the point of sale in order for you to be on the Amex network. And arguably, in a short-term effect, that does, quote, raise price. It doesn't allow a merchant to institute a discount to use a cheaper card that the merchant gets more return from the consumer using. But in turn, that's forgetting about the other side of the platform, which is the viability of the rewards network and bringing in consumers in the first place. If you can steer everyone who's on Amex to the alternative, there's not going to be Amex. And presumably Amex brings some value for you to join their network in the first place. And so there's a lot of these effects that platforms institute. For example, Google could have some restrictions on advertisers, what they can advertise, where they can be placed, how much consumers actually see. That harms advertisers. In turn, they might show more ads for certain types of queries that consumers specifically might not want to see. That harms consumers. But they're trying to obviously monetize through this advertising. So it's going to be a balance of not only having a lot of users, but satisfying those who monetize the platform through the advertising. And so often if we look at policies purely from a sense of, well, we're going to look at the final consumer, often defined as the person actually purchasing it, we miss the point of a platform, which is also bringing another, quote, consumer group, whether it's an advertising, whether it's the merchants. And I think that explains the Amex decision, which is obviously a huge subject in of itself. But I think one thing that I hope even the critics would acknowledge is that the court was trying to wrestle, good or bad, with the idea that governance needs to go on both sides, and an inordinate focus on just one side, you're going to miss the boat. Whereas in a single-sided market, that's obviously okay. There's only one side to look at, which is that consumer side, ultimately, that the welfare cares about. And so that's something we need to be cautious of, but it doesn't always matter. So I'll stop there, but that's also a misnomer that when you have a multi-sided platform, oh, that means you got to bring the whole armada, talk about one group and the segment group. How are we going to ever administer this? This is going to take forever. This is a ridiculous decision. That's not what the decision says. It's only when it invokes both sides do you need to assess both sides. If it's just one side, there's fraud or collusion on one side, you just stick with one side. And so antitrust is very flexible in terms of that question.